this world. On tonight's show, we're going to tell you about some extraordinary experiences. The kind of experiences sometimes called paranormal. They're so extraordinary because all our conventional knowledge of the world says that they're simply not possible. But if you believe our witnesses tonight, then we must say that at least as far as they're concerned, these things did happen. But why did they happen, and what caused them? Can science ever provide an explanation? Or must we simply accept that some events are outside and beyond concrete scientific understanding? To launch this programme, we commissioned our own survey. We asked people whether they'd had any experiences they would describe as paranormal. An amazing 36% said yes. That's over a third of the population who've had an experience for which there's no apparent explanation. Well, helping me, I hope, to provide some explanations tonight are Dr. Lyle Watson, who's the author of that famous book Supernature, among many others, and Dr. Susan Blackmore, who's a psychologist specialising in the paranormal. And Lyle, first of all, you've spent 30 years in the pursuit of the paranormal. Why does it fascinate you so much?
It still does. I'm a naturalist, and I like to know everything that's going on around me. I'm just curious. And the more I learn, the more I realize that we actually know very little. We don't have answers to the most basic questions, such as what makes us sleep, why we tend to forget our dreams, how we ever remember anything at all. And in the midst of so much mystery, I'm no longer terribly put out if I come across evidence that suggests that telepathy might work or that ghosts really exist. In fact, to the contrary, I've become fascinated by these soft edges to the sciences, and I'm doing everything I can to explore them and find out how they work.
Susan, though, you're very sceptical, so why are you studying it?
Well, it might sound like a contradiction, but really it isn't. And I wasn't sceptical in the beginning. 20 years ago, when I was first studying psychology, I had all sorts of strange experiences, out-of-body experiences and so on, that I thought psychology wouldn't be able to explain. I thought we needed to turn to the paranormal. But as I went on through 20 years of research on Ouija boards and tarot cards and ESP and telepathy and so on, I never came across any evidence that really convinced me we need paranormal explanations. But that doesn't mean that the experiences aren't interesting. People have strange experiences all the time, and I want to understand them, whether they're paranormal or not.
Well, I'll be fascinated to see what both of you make of our stories tonight. And our first one is about Liz Howard from Cheshire. Liz has worked as a scientist at ICI. She's the mother of 3 children, certainly not a woman with time for an overactive imagination. And yet her story is a strange and compelling one. It began with a vivid dream.
The dream itself was very vivid, and when I woke I could remember it in technicolor detail, really. So much so that for the following few days, weeks and then into months, this picture kept coming back into my head for no apparent reason. Just when I was washing the dishes, doing the ironing, there would be this picture. It wasn't frightening, it was just a dream. And yet the picture seemed to haunt me.
6 months later, Liz Howard and her family were on their way to stay with friends when they decided to break their journey.
Oh, here we are. We should be able to get something to eat here.
Thank goodness for that. I could murder a cup of tea.
Well, where are we going?
Well, we're going to get a snack and stretch our legs and have a look round.
Have a look at what?
Little Coat Manor. Should be interesting. It's a big old house full of history.
By coincidence, an Elizabethan pageant was being held at Littlecote that day.
Where's that ice cream?
Yeah, probably.
We can't be too long if we're going to be at Cannon Clare's by 4.
Yeah, well, we'll just have a quick look and a drink. Brian, stop the car.
What is it? What's the matter?
No, it can't be.
Can't be what?
It can't happen like this. It just can't.
What are you on about?
The dream.
What dream?
The house. This is the house.
What house? What are you on about? Liz? Stay in the car, you two. Are you all right?
just how it was in my dream.
Come on, love, the kids are getting restless.
No, Brian. I've got this really weird feeling.
What do you mean?
It was up there. In the back of the house.
What was up where?
I don't know. But something awful happened up there.
He said, how do you know all this? Have you been here before? And I said, no, not that I know of. Not that I can think of. And I don't know why I know so much about this place. I said, but forget it, don't worry about it. Let's go and have a cup of tea anyway. Which we did. And he said, are you all right now? Shall we go and look in the house? He said, we might as well go and have a look around the house anyway, because if we don't, you're going to be worried about this for a long time. Inside, the guide took us on a tour around all the ground floor rooms, explaining the history of the house, which was a very large house.
Seen any ghost yet, Mum?
No. Shut up.
It was very interesting, but there was nothing that made me feel peculiar as I had when I first saw the house from outside, until we went upstairs. As I stepped down into that room, although the sun was shining outside, I had an impression that it was dark, that it was windy, that it was raining, that there was a fire burning in the fireplace, and that I was not happy. And then the guide began to explain about that particular room.
Now, this is the haunted landing, so called because hundreds of years ago a newborn baby was murdered in this room and in that fireplace. Now, legend has it that the midwife brought the baby out from the bedroom and the child was grabbed from her grasp and thrown onto the fire.
Afterwards, when I got back home again, I thought that I had to follow this up because, firstly, dreams don't come true, not in real life. And secondly, how could I have had a feeling that something dreadful had happened in that room, that particular room, when I'd never even been inside the house? And I went to our local library to see if there were documented cases of this type where people had had dreams that literally came true. And I thought, well, maybe it's a natural thing that's got a rational explanation and I must go and find it.
Just think that time goes in circles, Liz. We've reached the top of the circle. We're going back to the beginning, drifting back through time itself, using all memories.
Liz wrote to local hypnotist Joe Keaton. Intrigued by her story, he invited her to join one of his hypnosis groups.
And you're looking for any time the word Littlecoat meant anything to you at all.
Afterwards he said to me, there's nothing there in my regression. And I said, what's regression? And he said, take you back to past lives. At which point I said, well, my husband said you were a crank and you're just about proving it now.
She was so sceptical when she came, I hadn't got much hope of regressing her. But I did keep my fingers crossed because I knew, as a scientist, she would examine the evidence in the correct way. You're drifting back to times before you were born.
When I was hypnotised, I didn't lose sight of the fact of who I was or where I was. But at the same time, some other part of my brain seemed to be working that was sort of detached from me. And I was quite fascinated just to be hypnotised. So I agreed to go back, even though I didn't believe that regression was going back in time.
It is cold.
Where are you?
In the tower.
What tower?
Tower of London.
What year is it?
It is 1536.
So it's the year 1536, and you're in the Tower of London. What do you do here?
I be with Lady Anne. She's waiting for the executioner.
When I was regressed, I began talking about Anne Boleyn in the Tower of London. And I just thought, how ridiculous, because I know very little about history. And I thought, if they start asking me questions about Anne Boleyn, historically accurate questions, there would be no way that I could answer them because I didn't understand the ins and outs of history, although I knew that she was Henry VIII's wife and lost her head.
Anne Boleyn, you've got to be kidding.
I know, it sounds daft. But we looked up some of the things in the history books and they were true.
So what does that prove?
I don't know.
I do. You're mixing with cranks and becoming one.
Look, Brian, if you feel like that, why don't you come with me and see for yourself?
Well, as far as hypnotists are concerned, I mean, I'd seen them on the television where you get a row of chairs and hypnotists and people come in with all sorts of antics, and it doesn't wash with me somehow. I can't accept it. So, in my opinion, it would have been better if she hadn't gone. But she was determined to follow it through and try and find out whether there was some answers.
Liz needed to know more about the woman in the tower with Anne Boleyn.
Who are you? What's your name?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth?
Aye. I was named after the old Queen.
And when were you born, Elizabeth? What year?
1503.
Well, that can't be right. Elizabeth wasn't even on the throne then. Because of that, I said to Brian, I wonder who was on the throne at that time. So he went away and did his bit of research and came back and said it was Henry VII. And Henry VII was married to Elizabeth of York, who would have been known as Queen Elizabeth.
What year is it now?
It is 1514.
And where do you live?
Gosworth Hall.
Have you a family?
Aye. A mother and father and brothers and sisters.
And what's your family name?
It is Fitton.
So you are Elizabeth Fitton of Gosworth Hall.
Aye.
Off to sleep, Elizabeth. Off to sleep. Now remembering everything clearly and distinctly. Coming back, coming back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wide awakeness.
Do they know?
No, they don't.
No what?
Elizabeth Fitton's my maiden name.
More and more people started shouting reincarnation at me. And I just said to them, well, it isn't true. I'm not a reincarnation. And the chances are that Elizabeth Fitton, as I've described her, didn't exist anyway. Now, I had said that when Elizabeth Fitton was a girl, she lived at Gosworth Hall. And the Fittons did, in fact, live at Gosworth Hall, but not necessarily Elizabeth Fitton. So I went to the hall just to make sure that it was an invention of mine.
Hey, Liz, there's a list of families here that lived at Gosworth Hall.
Hugh, Margaret. Oh, isn't Elizabeth? No, it's too early.
Isabel.
Cicely, Anne, Ellen, Elizabeth.
When are you going to tell them all now?
I was a little bit disappointed, to say the least, because I'd gone there really to see that there wasn't an Elizabeth Fitton around at that time. And the family tree indicated that there was an Elizabeth Fitton around at that time.
The present owners of Gosworth Hall are Tim and Liz Richards.
Well, we first heard about the whole story from an American film crew who came to follow up a story and to film at Gosworth. And then we were invited to attend a regression session and decided, albeit sceptically, that we would attend. And we both thought fairly carefully as to what we could ask Liz that would be able to prove to our satisfaction that she was indeed genuine.
You're in the kitchen at Gosworth. Look down and tell me what the floor's made of.
What are you standing on, Elizabeth?
Standing on the carriage.
All the floors, of course, at Gosworth are now wooden, and they were replaced in Victorian times. But originally they were stone, made of carriage stone. Now, only my wife and I know this point, and it would have been quite impossible for Liz Howard to have known that the floors in the hall were originally made of carriage stone.
What colour is Gawsworth painted?
Oh, can they not see?
We can't see very well, Elizabeth. What colour is it?
It is yellow and black.
Well, most people assume that the magpie houses of Cheshire, as we know, they're all black and white now, and most people assume that they have always been black and white. But recent research had indicated that, in fact, they were yellow and black in Tudor times. And this is something that, unless you're an architectural student, you wouldn't, Liz Howard wouldn't have known this normally. It had only just been published.
The Richards were impressed by Liz, and they invited her and Brian to spend a day at Gawsworth with them. They took them into the local church, another place Liz had described under hypnosis.
Oh, this is odd. It all feels different.
What do you mean different?
Well, in my head, the altar was there and the congregation was there. It's all back to front.
Oh, at last she's got something wrong.
I was quite pleased with it, but it was only a couple of minutes before Tim Richards walked in and everything was back to normal again, or abnormal.
Of course, in your day, Liz, you would have come into the church from this door over here, which was bricked up over 100 years ago.
It did impress us very much because it was something that she couldn't possibly have known. And with Liz's story, it's accumulation of little details that make it so believable rather than the major historical facts. And I don't know how you explain her story, but she's certainly not making it up.
How old are you now?
70 year and more.
And where are we?
A little coat.
What do you do here?
Work in the kitchens.
Are you happy?
I'm old. Have pains.
Off to sleep, Elizabeth. Off to sleep. Now come forward 2 years. You're there now. Tell us what's happening.
It's cold. It's raining. The baby has come. Midwife has delivered her of a boy. She's taken him to the master. Oh, it has no clothes. Master is saying something. No, I cannot be. Master wants to kill the baby. No, no, Master, I beg of you, don't harm the child. Give it to me. Give it to me. No, I beg. I beg. No. Oh, God, no.
Sleep. Sleep.
No.
Sleep.
No.
Sleep.
I was looking for, originally, why the dream of Littlecote had haunted me. And the tale about my character, Elizabeth Fitton, ended in death at Littlecote Manor. And so the significance really of the house, so far as my hypnotised state was concerned, was that my character that I projected when hypnotised, I imagined died there at the moment that the child was burnt on the fire.
And Liz Howard is with us in the studio tonight. Liz, welcome. Now, unfortunately, we'll never know what really happened to that baby in that story. But how do you explain that you knew so much about this Elizabeth Fitton in so much detail? What's your explanation?
There is no explanation, and I didn't know anything about her. I made it up. I invented it.
But there's so much detail, 40 hours of hypnosis, which obviously we couldn't go into there, a lot of which checks out as accurate.
I must have a very good imagination and be a good storyteller.
Could you have read about these things and forgotten about them? Were you good at history at school?
I didn't do history at school, but I'm sure that throughout my life up until that time, I must have absorbed an awful lot of knowledge that I wasn't aware of.
But you don't think you were reincarnated?
No, 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 definitely not.
Lyle, what do you think?
I think I share Liz's difficulty with reincarnation. It's a difficult scientific thing to deal with. But I'm enormously impressed with the wealth of data in your regression tapes. There's so many details, apparently good details, of what it was like to be alive in Tudor times, that that's convincing to me. So the real question really is not whether she's reincarnated, but where this information comes from. I believe you when you say you don't know that much about history, but some part of you does. Unconsciously you're picking up a lot of information, apparently good information. If it isn't reincarnation, then my inclination as a biologist would be to say that I think it's from an area we sometimes speak of as a collective memory, a data bank, if you like, which we share with maybe all or most of our species, and to which we have access, usually only in dreams or under hypnosis. Although I suspect, although it's not a genetic memory, we have the genetic information that gives us the way of accessing it, and we've forgotten how to do that very well. But under certain circumstances we do. And I think that under those circumstances we're capable of picking up a lot more than one would expect. Now, if this is a data bank, then your random accessing of it would bring in all kinds of stuff. But I suspect you're doing something else to zero on the important bits. And what is keying you in, I'm guessing now, what is keying you in is perhaps the recognition there of one thing that leaps out like a bright light, which is your own name. And you're picking that out of the morass of information.
Susan, what do you think about this data bank idea?
Well, it's an appealing idea, and it's been around a long time. It's popular. It seems to make sense. But once you start to ask questions about it, it all falls to pieces. Where is this data bank? What's storing it? What kinds of information does it store? Only emotional ones, or any? And do they overlay each other? I think when you start to query it that way, you realise that you'd have to add on to what we know of science, all these extra phenomena and extra places for them to be. I don't find it very plausible. I think we're just underestimating the powers of our own minds, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there exactly. You may have just picked these things up as you've gone through life, and hypnosis and dreams are the two circumstances that best of all dredge up all the stuff that's down there and we don't consciously realise is there.
I feel there's a great similarity between dreaming and being hypnotised.
Yes, I think you're right there.
When you are hypnotised, it feels very much like being on the verge of a dream.
Yes.
The two are very...
The mystery, though, of course.
No, we have a problem, though, because the phenomenon of cryptomnesia, of forgetting
Hidden
things
memory.
and then remembering them again, is a good one. I'm sure it's worth exploring, but it doesn't explain how you knew things like the colour of Gawsworth Hall, how you could identify the exact geological nature of a stone no one can see.
It's possible, though, it's possible that although I didn't know that Gawsworth Hall would have been yellow, and I hadn't consciously thought that any Tudor building was going to be that colour, somewhere at some point I may have seen a picture of a Tudor building that was that colour. I mean, how do I know that I didn't? Nothing to do with Gawsworth Hall regression or anything. I may have just seen a picture, and when I was asked that direct question, out came the right answer rather than the answer that I would normally have given had I been wide awake and talking to you now.
And the coincidence of the name is extraordinary as well. Maybe that does help to explain what she's
Are there other Elizabeth Fittons in your family?
Well, my mother's married name was Elizabeth Fitton, because I was named from...
A grandmother, a great-grandmother?
Not Fittons, no, because you see, my mother wasn't a Fitton before she married.
I see.
But if you look at the Gawsworth Hall Fitton family tree, then a lot of the females were called either Elizabeth or Mary, and a lot of the men were either John or Edward. It's a family name.
And had any of your family been to Gawsworth before?
My mother had been there many years ago, after I got married, so I knew that the Fittons had lived there because she told me about the visit, but I'd never been there myself or taken much interest in it.
But she may have told you some things which you
It's
remembered.
possible.
I'm still not buying this idea of accidental memory. There's too much shape to this story, too many cohesive details.
But couldn't the shape be given by the process of pulling out these true ones? And actually there are a lot of false things in there as well. And we know from our research that actually the real Elizabeth Fitton didn't die at the time that baby died. And in fact she had 7 children, which is never mentioned in this story.
I still think the story is fascinating, and I think that one of the things particularly appeals to me, that we know that Anne Boleyn was executed. We know that she had 4 maids of honour in attendance on her at that occasion. We know the names of 3 of them. The name of the 4th isn't recorded anywhere. I'm hoping that someone who's watching this program has access to sources we were denied and can find out that name. And wouldn't it be fascinating if it was Elizabeth Fitton?
Liz, you've been hoping for a rational explanation in all this. Has this helped at all?
I think the word you used was a correct one when you say coincidence. There are so many coincidences in life that sooner or later 2 are going to bump together and you're going to think, hang on, I've got to investigate this.
The mystery continues. Thank you very much indeed. We could talk for the rest of the program.